Welcome back, America. If you don't know Jamal Bowman, he is a member of Congress from New York, New York 16, and he's one of the hardest left members of the caucus, the Democratic caucus. He was on with Wolf Blitzer yesterday, and he said, we need to stop drilling for fossil fuels completely. We need an expedited way to get us clean, renewable energy, or we will continue to have these severe weather events. All right, so he drank the Kool-Aid, and he's upset with the debt deal because it allows pipelines to be built that will produce American energy, especially natural gas, move it where it needs to go, and generally expedite every single project in America subject to the National Environmental Policy Act. If you look beyond the headlines, the NEPA deal in the small print is the one the Democrats had to give, the big win that the Democrats had to give the Republicans because their own caucus has people like Joe Manchin in it who are just as angry as can be that the Democrats have declared war on energy, freedom, and productivity. It's a huge win. It's a big win for Kevin McCarthy generally. I know there are some Freedom Caucus members. If wishes were rainbows, they would be just completely covered in color all the time because they wish something better had come out. That isn't going to happen. You know, I used to hate it when John Boehner would begin every conversation. We have one half of 1/3 of the federal government. No, actually, you don't. You've got one half of the whole. The Supreme Court has nothing to do with legislating. It's the president and the Congress. Now, when the House Republicans passed their bill, they switched, they flipped the script on the Democrats, and bravo to them for doing so. Bravo to Speaker McCarthy for getting it done. Birch Gold, sponsor of the program. Gold is at $1,941 an ounce this morning. The market report from Friday was that the debt deal was in sight and the default risk, which was never very highly priced in by the market, evaporated completely. No one expects the United States to default. The question is who would blink? The Democrats blinked. The Dow went up 328 points or 1%. The NASDAQ went up 277 or 2%. Amazon and the other artificial intelligence stock, Amazon went up 4.44% as the gold rush for AI continues. Now, there's a little bit of dot-com bubble in there, but not with gold. Gold is down at $1,941 an ounce. If you're going to buy gold today, do it from Birch Gold. I trust them. I buy my gold from them. You go to hughgold.com or text my name, Hugh, to 989898. They also specialize not only in selling gold direct to you, but they specialize in 401ks, IRAs, and SEP IRAs, where they are the third-party intermediary which administers your IRA, your 401k, your SEP IRA that is necessary for the gold that is there as it increases in value, not to be taxed every year. When you eventually sell it, you have cash there, you pull it out, you get taxed on the return, but it grows tax-free over the years. Over the last century, gold kept up with inflation. That's the key thing to remember about why you diversify into real estate, gold, and everything else, why you can't be all in the market. Markets go down as well as up. They're going to have a good summer, it looks like, because of the AI boom. I have a story on that, in fact. Where is that story? Because why are markets so calm? It's revenge of the quant funds. That means automatic buying and selling based upon data. It's got no human involved in it. It's just data-driven. Well, data-driven, they'll diversify that portfolio, and part of that portfolio will be in precious metals because diversification has been the rule of sound investors for as long as investments have existed. So please do diversify. Birch Gold, get your gold at hughgold.com or text my name, Hugh, to 989898. Angel Tree. We're catching up on Gallagher because of the generosity of people like you. And I got to say, thank you. I am so astonished. We've already made gold, but that doesn't mean we've already filled up every camp. We haven't. Angel Tree has capacity. They can put more kids into camp. The children of men and women who are in prison deserve a week in the wild, a week of camp, a week of just being dirty as can be and making lanyards and shooting guns and swimming and having a grand old time at a safe camp, which is run by professionals who care a lot about the gospel and care about these kids a great deal. Listen to Raphael talking about his time as a Angel Tree camper.
Now, almost 20 years later, it started with a gift. It started with an Angel Tree gift. It starts with an Angel Tree camp. Now I have changed the whole trajectory for my family. Not only do I work for Prison Fellowship, but I volunteer in prison. I am an Angel Tree donor. All of those things started with that initial investment. What's that worth? What's the soul worth? I would say a lot.
It's infinite. Change the directory of soul, and it's an infinite benefit. Please head over to HughHewitt.com. The banner is at the top. We're doing this for 2 more weeks. My guest host tomorrow, Kurt Schlichter, Generalissimo on Thursday, and Ed Morrissey on Friday. We'll continue to tell you about it, but I'd rather get the credit. Call 888-206-2764. I like to taunt Dwayne when he doesn't raise any money. Or go to HughHewitt.com. The banner is at the top. And please be generous because these kids deserve that week. You can change their life. ReliefFactor.com may change your life. I take it every morning. I took it in the first hour. I'll remind you in hour 3 as well as hour 2 today. What you want to do with ReliefFactor.com is enjoy the summer. You want to get out there and walk every day. I walked past a speeding trap yesterday, and they almost got me because it's an out-of-town speeding trap on one of the busiest lanes that nobody knows where the cops sit. And that's okay. That's a Memorial Day tradition in small towns across America, is go out and get the out-of-towners who are blowing through town too fast. But I was out trundling, and the officer, as I trundled by, said, "Nice day for a walk." I said, I'm not really walking, officer, but I didn't show up on his speed gauge. So I wasn't going fast, but I am going fast enough that I need my ReliefFactor.com, and did it on Saturday and did it on Monday. Got my 10Ks in. I recommend you get out there and start working out today. Start walking, move up to trundling, eventually run. ReliefFactor.com. $19.95 gets you started. Come right back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Our roving elections analysis on the global stage. Admiral James Stavridis, retired United States Navy Admiral, former Allied Supreme Commander of NATO and head of Southern Command, is back in his ancestral homeland in Greece, and where we find him this morning. Good morning, Admiral, and a happy Memorial Day to you. I'm sure you were remembering fallen comrades yesterday.
I was indeed, Hugh, and I'm looking out at the Aegean Sea where my ancestors came from and thinking about the Greek struggles against the Persian Empire. Persians, of course, are the Iranians of today, and I'm proud to say Greeks stood for democracy 2,500 years ago.
Now, the Greeks also stood for democracy last week, and while the center-right came very close to an absolute majority, they didn't quite get there. But I was surprised that the Prime Minister said, let's do it again. And so they're going to vote again. And Turkey just voted, and Spain has snap elections. You're like in the world center of elections right now.
Indeed. And, of course, these are very different electoral systems than we have here in the United States. They have snap elections. Prime ministers can call them. There's proportional representation. But the bottom line is the big election was actually in Turkey, in Ankara, where President Erdogan, who's been a difficult member of the NATO alliance, was returned for an unprecedented third term as president of Turkey. Greek elections will be coming up in late June. I think we'll see current Prime Minister Mitsotakis continue in power. Events will be a continuation of what we've seen here in the Aegean.
Now, the New York Times headline after the re-election of President Erdogan yesterday was, will Erdogan's victory soften Turkey's opposition to Sweden in NATO? The writer is fairly optimistic about that. What do you think, Admiral Stavridis?
I share his optimism. I think what we're going to see is a self-confident Erdogan who now has 5 more years of runway, and he won't see any domestic mileage to be made out of opposing Swedish membership. And this gets slightly complicated, but in opposing Swedish membership, he was playing to his base, who are anti-Kurdish, and there's a Kurdish expatriate population in Sweden who Erdogan would like to see prosecuted for what he calls terrorism. Hey, bottom line, that's too complicated to worry about. Bottom line is, now that he has played to his base in the election, I think he'll play to the larger geopolitical forces. I think he will allow Sweden into the alliance over the next 2 months.
Now, Admiral, I want to switch to domestic politics. There is a debt limit deal that caps spending at 2023 levels, allows defense to go up 3%, domestic discretionary spending going up 1%, and an obligation put on the Congress to pass the appropriation bills, all 12 of them, by the end of January, or there will be 1% cuts across the board. I like this deal because it's all a Republican expect out of a divided Congress, but my hawk friends are not happy. What say you, Admiral?
I like the deal. I think it is a reasonable inside track, if you will, for defense to include an obvious plus up, plus potential for more plus up. And don't forget this, of all of those appropriation bills out there, the only one that has consistently been actually passed is defense. So I think overall this comes out fairly well. That's the good news. The bad news is if inflation continues at 5%, I think it'll come down. But if it does, for sake of argument, a 3% plus up in defense, we're only losing ground to China. So it's a mixed picture, but given the state of play in Washington, I'll take it.
Now, I had a realist conservative tell me over the weekend that 3% is healthy. It's not enough to keep pace with inflation, but that the Pentagon can find the 2% they need to cut if they're serious about it. Now, I've heard that again and again, and it's not my favorite argument, but what do you think about that?
I think it's reasonable, and certainly where could you cut becomes the immediate question. And I think you look at some of the big legacy systems. Look, we're not going to fight a land war in Asia. We're not going to fight a big land war in Europe. My good friends and colleagues in the Army we have 1 million people in the U.S. Army, Army Guard, Army Reserve. That's where the big money is. So there's some personnel cuts. And by the way, the Navy, the Air Force could take some cuts as well. Number two, we need to be putting more money against things like cyber, space, unmanned vehicles, dare I say it, maritime, as we are fading behind China in the race for numbers of warships. So I think a plus up there kind of takes something away, and there's always bureaucratic overhead defense agencies to cut. So I think your friend is in the right place. Can DOD, my good friend Lloyd Austin, find 2% to make that come out? I think so.
Now, on those legacy systems, Admiral, I've heard it proposed occasionally that we need a new BRAC, but not for bases, but for systems. Would you explain what BRAC is and whether or not you agree with that idea?
Sure. BRAC is base realignment and closure, which is a fancy way of cutting land installations around the world, but more of a focus in the United States, cutting bases that DOD built during the Cold War, but probably doesn't need anymore. Let me give you a number. At the end of the Cold War, Hugh, we had 400 bases in Europe. We're now down to about 40 bases, 90% cut. Can we replicate that in a number of places? I think so. So the idea of a BRAC for systems is that so often these systems achieve a life force of their own because they have constituencies like the big defense companies, sometimes called the primes. They have constituencies in the Congress because systems are built in a particular place, and it's very hard to cut them. The idea of BRAC for bases or for systems is to elevate above that local political noise and make the cuts you need to do. I like the idea to have it for systems and platforms, Hugh, as well as for bases, which was a very successful effort a couple decades ago.
And well, some of those bases have been redeveloped successfully. Others still are sort of fallow and will eventually prove very resilient. Admiral, do you have any nominees for the cutting table for surgery? I mean, just absolutely tossing them out. Got any nominees at the front of your mind?
I think as we look at what we need to put money into, which I mentioned, satellites, space, cyber, special forces, unmanned, I think you go to the opposite of those systems. So these are large, standing formations of infantry troops. And, you know, if there was an Army general on here, he would probably, or she would probably say something like, well, you know, the Russians are invading Ukraine. Don't we need 1 million people in the standing forces of the United States, the Army? I don't think so. I think that's unlikely. We have a lot of new systems that we ought to be putting money into. So I'd say our standing Army formations could do with some cutting. I think that from the Navy side, I think it is time to look at how many more of these big, huge, high-power centers like aircraft carriers we need. I love aircraft carriers. I've commanded them as part of a carrier strike group. They are huge combat power, but should we be distributing that combat power more? I think probably so. So that's another area. On the Air Force side, I think our long-range strategic bombers, hyper expensive, put a lot of eggs in a single basket. I think that's an area. And then finally, you mentioned installations. I think we still have some cutting to do in bases around the world. I think those are 4 areas you could take an immediate look at.
Now, I'm curious, who would you put on a BRAC for systems, Admiral? What kind of backgrounds would you encourage the BRAC members to have? I know that the last BRAC had a great number of civilians on it who were very cold eye about it. Very cold eye. I mean, they just killed them left and right. All civilians, a mix. What's the Stavridis menu there? What would you put on there? Actually, recipe.
I think it's a mix. About 1/3 former active duty military who really have operated these systems. I have spent a lifetime in the military operating the Aegis combat system, for example, our air defense systems at sea. Who are the analogs to that in the Army, the Air Force, who could talk to the value propositions? I'd say about a third active duty military. I'd say about a third political actors. I'll throw out a name. Former chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Mac Thornberry, happens to be a Republican, very, if you will, a center-right kind of Republican, very thoughtful, someone who understands the politics of Washington, but is a centrist and deeply experienced in the politics and also the absolute necessity for military budgets. And then I think, Hugh, about a third, I would bring in scientists, technologists, because these decisions about systems are going to turn on your understanding of artificial intelligence, quantum computing. How fast is it coming? Where is it going? I think you need all three of those groups represented in a systems bracket, probably one-third, one-third, one-third.
Last question, Admiral. We continue to see shadow boxing from Ukraine called Shaping the Battlefield. What are they doing by announcing the spring offensive 4 or 5 times a week?
I think, first of all, they're impinging on Russian morale. And by the way, this morning, reports of, I have no idea if true or not, drone attacks against Moscow apartment buildings. I want to learn more about that. But, there's a reason shadow boxing is an expression, and it means simply being able to punch fast, punch from the shadows, be unpredictable, be difficult to assess what's real and what it perhaps isn't real. So I think the shadow boxing, the preparation for the summer offensive is quite real. I would say it's underway already. I think if you talk to Dave Petraeus, a renowned Army commander, he would tell you shadow boxing, the shaping of the system is critical. That's what we're seeing in Ukraine right now.
Admiral Stavridis, enjoy your time in your ancestral homeland. I hope the weather is great and not yet a bazillion degrees as the last time it was in Greece when I was there. Enjoy and come back safe. I will be right back, America. Don't go anywhere. Continuing on the Tuesday Hugh Hewitt Show. Speaker McCarthy coming up next hour. Lots ahead on today's Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you by Prison Fellowship's Angel Tree Summer Camps. Click on the banner at hughhewitt.com.
Welcome back, America. It's Tuesday. That means Bethany Mandel is in the house. Good morning, Bethany. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. I hope you had a great Memorial Day weekend, saluting the fallen and also having a great time with family. Was it a good one?
It was good. It was good. It was pretty laid back because it was pouring buckets here.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. We had a beautiful weekend up north. Bethany, I've been reading, and I'm going to talk with David Van Drehle after the next hour about the Book of Charlie. His neighbor lived to be 109. And the interesting thing about this that connects it up with you is that Charlie grew up free range. His dad was killed at the age of 7. His mom just said, go off. And he rode the rails. He went coast to coast with his buddies when he was 17. Then he raised his children the same way. What does Bethany Mandel think about free range child raising?
So I actually had sort of a similar upbringing. I was raised by a single mom, and she was kind of like, you need to be able to function as a human being when you're outside of this house. So let's get some training wheels on now. But I'm the same way. I let my kids run around. I give them an air tag and say, go to the neighbor's house and go play. And I purposely don't give them a phone because if there is actually an emergency, there are people around that they can call me, but I want them to be able to have the problem solving skills to figure out if they get into an issue, like this is how I solve it without just calling my mom.
You know, the other thing I noticed over the weekend is a big story on children moving to digital watches, which allow them to text their mom and their dad and 911 and no other social media. It's like the consensus is formed overnight.
Yeah.
No social media for children. Yep. Do you agree with that? Do you think you see that consensus forming?
I do, and it's interesting because a lot of people, even just a couple of years ago, would give their second, third, fourth grade kids iPhones, not just cell phones, but iPhones, phones that were nicer than mine, honestly. Which, first of all, like, why would you trust your child with $1,000 device in their pocket? I can't even trust my kid to walk into like a store with my credit card in his pocket, which happened yesterday. But there's I think a growing understanding that social media is rotting our brains, especially the forms of social media that kids use, TikTok and Snapchat, are altering their perception of reality and turning them into junkies, honestly, digital junkies. And I say that as a digital junkie. I have not had a cell phone for 9 days now. My phone broke and I ordered a new one. And I am finding that I keep on reaching for something every 30 seconds. And I'm realizing like, oh my God, like I really have a problem. And I'm hoping that this is like God's way of telling me to reset by not having a phone, because I'm having to like actually go on a computer to check my email. And it turns out like, I don't really get that many emails. Like, am I that important? No, I don't need to be able to access them every second of the day.
I can't agree more with that. And I'm so glad to see an almost overnight consensus emerge. Before high school, absolutely not. In high school, maybe. But how long until the schools figure out they should just ban iPhones from school?
They're never going to do it because it's too difficult. I mean, this is the problem with outsourcing parenting to other people. It's easier to do the things that are bad for kids. It's easier to just give them the cookie over and over and over on the part of the school because they don't have to deal with the consequences. Parents can't count on the schools to ban the iPhones. There's this great sort of pact called Wait for 8. And it's wait until 8th grade in order to get a cell phone. And everyone in a class or in a community signs this pact together. And so parents join arm in arm and say, we will not wait. We will not do this until all of us go in together, so that kids can't say Johnny down the street has a cell phone, Sally down the block has a cell phone. You can say, no, I know everyone in your class doesn't have a cell phone because I've spoken to all of their parents and we are all on the same page. I think that that's what parents have to do. They have to join arms with each other instead of counting on the school, because the school's not going to do it.
No, my Bethany Mandel alert went off this week when Yahoo News quoted you as trying to define woke. And I don't want to do that. I just want to talk about Bud Light being down 17% and the enduring brand damage. Do you think direct-to-consumer brands have figured out, whether it's Target, Bud Light, Disney, they cannot be perceived as messing with people's children?
No, I don't think that they've learned that. I think that they've learned that Dylan Mulvaney is a third rail. But the reason why I went viral in that like very short clip in which I'm like stumbling over my words because I hadn't slept in 4 days, the reason that I went viral was because it was very convenient for the left, and that's something that was going through my head as it was happening. They want us to sound like we don't know what we're talking about and that this is a total figment of our imaginations. No, we haven't made up this phenomenon. I wrote an entire book about it. This is something that's happening, and they want to gaslight us. They want to pretend like, oh, there's nothing going on. There's no man behind the curtain. Everything is fine. You're imagining that this hypersexualization of childhood and how we're pushing propaganda and we're pushing sort of brainwashing on your children from a younger and younger age. All of that is in your imagination. Nothing has changed. And no, a lot of things have changed. And if you walk into a Target, you can see the baby onesie pride. And I think that, until the financial incentives are made such that they're really feeling it, like what has happened to Bud Light has to happen to Target. It has to happen to Kohl's. It has to happen to all of these stores. And
it is happening. It's not a boycott. It's not a boycott. It's just an awareness that some people are on the side of successfully raising your children and others aren't. Bethany Mandel is on the side of parents. Stolen Youth is her book. Have a great Memorial Day. I'll be right back. Kevin McCarthy coming up in the next hour of The Hugh Hewitt Show.
This hour of Hugh Hewitt starts right now on Salem News Channel.
Good morning, America. I hope you had a great Memorial Day weekend. I'm Hugh Hewitt inside of Studio North. I'm talking with Speaker Kevin McCarthy this morning about the big debt limit deal that has all the progressives screaming and the Republicans generally applauding. We'll talk about it with Speaker McCarthy and with you on today's Hugh Hewitt Show. Tune in.
You won't want to miss a minute. This hour of Hugh Hewitt is on Salem News Channel.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I hope you had a great Memorial Day weekend. I'm Hugh Hewitt in Studio North. Coming up at the bottom of the hour, Speaker Kevin McCarthy joins me to discuss the debt limit deal. Also, David Von Drehle will be along to talk about his new bestseller, The Book of Charlie, the only book that I have read twice in 6 months in many years. It's so great. The Book of Charlie is for everyone. But I begin with Mollie Hemingway, our friend from Fox News and the Federalist. Good morning, Mollie. I hope you had a great Memorial Day weekend.
We had a lovely weekend, and good morning to you.
Now, there are two stories. I want to talk about the deal that's been outlined, but I also want to talk about the Bud Light story, because this morning Investors Daily came out with Bud Light boycott already cost Anheuser-Busch $15.7 billion. And this is since April 1. I don't think it's a boycott, by the way. I don't see people out there saying boycott Bud Light. I see people not drinking Bud Light. I didn't see any Bud Light at the Memorial Day barbecue yesterday. Did you?
I have seen almost nobody drinking Bud Light since this began. I mean, I have seen it like in the wild once, but it's shocking. Like even if you go to sporting venues or places where you would normally see quite a bit. But yeah, people don't want to be insulted and they don't want to be attacked this was a horrible decision by Bud Light to go down this road.
So I think there are two stories. One is the deal on the debt limit, and one is the Bud Light catastrophe. And it is a catastrophe for the brand and Anheuser-Busch. I think the latter is the bigger story, although all the headlines are on the debt limit deal, which will go, as all things do, away the moment that it passes, and we'll worry about the next thing, which will be the budget deadline. Weighing them both against each other, which is more significant, Mollie, for American life?
Yeah, no, I agree that it would be the participation by corporations in the agenda of the left and finally seeing some pushback to that from people on the right is a bigger story, which is not to say that the debt limit is not a big story. It is. It's just there was a very limited range of possible outcomes there, and we landed in that range of possible outcomes.
I'm going to come back to that, but I do believe this is a flare that every C-suite that is direct-to-consumer, it may not impact businesses that are not direct-to-consumer, but direct-to-consumer are having very confidential, quiet conversations in every C-suite room discussing how to avoid this cliff. It's not that they're political. They just are in business, Mollie, and I don't think they can miss this.
Well, the risk to doing what Bud Light did and what so many corporations have done is now becoming quite clear. You can be bullied by the left into adopting the most extreme of their political objectives and putting it into your advertising. You can do that, but you may actually destroy your company if you do it. And that's why it's so important what normal people did here in this Bud Light scenario, because the left has done such a good job of weaponizing so many systems that affect corporate decision-making, and they've been able to get away with it for a very long period of time, while most of America was just sort of hoping that everyone would stop being so crazy. And now they realize, like, okay, we actually have to do something in order to stop this insanity from happening and taking over literally every product that we buy.
Now, the first time I saw the evidence of pushback in the consumer market was Chick-fil-A, when the left attempted to shut down Chick-fil-A, and spontaneously, without any organization, millions of people who had never been to a Chick-fil-A before went to a Chick-fil-A. And that was the silent majority. Now with Target, I gather Kohl's is involved in another, let's drive off that cliff, and Bud Light primarily. Do you think the CEOs are calling in their people and talking to them about this?
Absolutely. I mean, you had a lot of people allowing decisions to be made by a sector of their corporation that was very, very politically engaged, and they could just kind of get away with this. And now there's going to be a lot more oversight over whether, a single advertising executive can tank the whole company. And just people will be reluctant, as they should be. I mean, of course, with advertising, there's always some transmission of values. But when the values are so, negative in this case, so wrong, but also just so controversial, it's really not something you're going to see people leaning into as much, even with the systems still in place that encourage corporations to do this type of behavior, which those do need to be dismantled.
Now I want to turn to the second story, which is the debt limit deal. I have the speaker coming on. I'm a big fan of this because I'm a realistic conservative. I know when you've got one half of the Congress, you're not going to get the world turned around. But I think they put the brakes on, and I love the NEPA reform. I can't tell you, that's what I did for 30 years. And I don't know that anyone who doesn't do it understands how significant it is. How's Mollie Hemingway evaluate what came out of this process?
Yeah, I'm not saying that I'm thrilled that we have the fiscal situation that we do in this country. It's really bad that we have as much debt as we have. It makes us less stable. But I think that if you look at this situation with a realistic understanding of how much control Democrats have, they run the presidency, they have the Senate, and they have only a narrow minority in the House, I think that the reforms that were enacted here, like what Republicans got out of this and the way that they played it was actually pretty smart. Now, I'm not saying maybe, I wasn't involved in these things. I'm sure someone could convincingly argue that McCarthy could have gotten more or even much more out of this. But actually, if you look at the situation on the ground, the time limit, everything that was happening, I think Democrats have a big reason to be unhappy with this, and Republicans should understand just how little they control in Washington.
Mollie, my favorite indication of who won, which is always a party game in Washington, D.C., and it usually is, you never know because it takes forever to figure out who won something. It's sort of like a draft choice. But my favorite headline yesterday is, quote, terrible public policy, close quote, why the debt deal infuriates climate activists. You know what? That's a win. If the Washington Post is running that the left is infuriated, that's a win.
Well, and you might remember that the Washington Post had been running headlines all week saying that Democrats were livid at how Biden had misplayed this situation. Much of the media headlines were that Democrats were mad, that they had trusted Biden when he refused to negotiate. They thought that they would get, just a clean increase, or that they could negotiate for much more. And, they're not happy with it. I think the problem for Republicans is that the opening bid from McCarthy, obviously it was better than what they end up getting, but that's what happens in negotiations. And McCarthy might have had some leverage, but he certainly didn't have that much leverage.
Now, the key lesson I take away, and I just want to know if you think it'll happen, is that when the Republicans pass something, whether or not they like it all, if they all hang together, they gain leverage. So we have 12 appropriations bills that have to pass under this deal. Do you think the Republicans will hang together to pass that, realizing that's where their leverage is?
I think they've had a lot of success since McCarthy became Speaker. Well, the Speaker battle really bonded them together quite nicely. Even the fact that they passed this debt limit increase to begin with was something of a miracle. I mean, Hugh, as well as I do, very few people thought that Republicans could band together to do that. And they did, and they've done it with other legislation, and it is working really well for them, and they have reason to continue it. And so I think, who knows, budget battles are crazy, but they could have great success if they stick together, yes.
If they stick together. And I do know, Chip Roy's a friend of the program. We love having on the congressman. He does not like this deal. He wanted more. But my answer to all those folks, and I'm a defense hawk. I wanted 5.5%. We only got 3%, and I think that's bad. But the left doesn't want to do any of that. So just stopping the bus so that we can then begin a 3-point turnaround, that to me is the big win, Mollie. Do you think the right will see it that way?
Well, I think that the right is correctly concerned with profligate spending, and neither party actually giving as much attention to it as they should. You even saw in the Trump era, Trump clearly had this idea that we can kind of grow our way out of the crisis, which is one of the ways you can handle the crisis, or cutting spending is the other one. And Republicans need to lead the way in having economic growth policies and cutting spending. It is legitimate to be worried about it going forward, because it really, it's insane how much debt each taxpayer is now carrying for this country, and it's not something that will enable us to handle all of the problems that are coming our way. So people are right to be concerned, but this is not the best. This is not exactly the best time for that fight.
Last question. I think the memory of Dick Darman lives. Now, he was a fine guy, but he negotiated a terrible deal on behalf of George H.W. Bush that raised taxes. There are no tax hikes in this bill, Mollie. That is one of the underreported. No revenue enhancements. Do you think that's a win?
Absolutely. And that was a huge priority for the left as well. And that is something that would have been even, we have an economy that's not doing well already, and having that kind of burden, additional burden placed on people would have been very bad. And that's one of many wins that are in this bill that people should look at.
Mollie Hemingway, always a pleasure. Have a great week. MZ Hemingway on Twitter. Follow her at The Federalist. See her on Fox News and come right back. The speaker's coming up at the bottom of the hour. I'll do a little bit more commentary. If you got a call on the deal, 1-800-520-1234. 1-800-520-1234. Connection to me, Hugh Hewitt. Stay tuned.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show brought to you by Sierra Pacific Mortgage. For more info, call 888-888-1172.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Andrew and Todd are great sponsors of my show. I want to remind you, if you've gone somewhere for your summer vacation and you decide you want to stay there forever, call up andrewandtodd.com. Maybe you just want to get a cottage by a lake somewhere. Call up andrewandtodd.com. 888-888-1172. Look, there isn't anything they don't do, but they really do know how to do vacation homes and second homes better than anybody because there's just a huge demand for it in California where they cut their teeth. AndrewandTodd.com, 888-888-1172. It's not an easy time to get a lender. It just isn't. Lenders are very, very leery right now, but Sierra Pacific Mortgage keeps lending, and they still have the same name that they've had for 20-plus years. They don't go through name changes during bankruptcies and stuff like that. They're just a good, sound bank, and they lend you money. Sierra Pacific Mortgage. And Andrew Del Rey and Todd Avakian are the guys you want to run your file. These are the fellows who take the first call through to the last day of signing. They'll get it done. All the T's will be crossed. All the I's will be dotted, and they will get you the loan. Better to start now, because I do not believe inflation is whipped. We have gotten and I'll talk with Speaker McCarthy after the break about this. But do not delay hoping that interest rates go down. It's not going to be a couple of years, and you can refinance and do what everyone else did when rates started to fall. But get into the market now because home prices are not going to fall, especially not second home prices. Let me also remind you, what doesn't fall is the cost of putting a kid in camp. And this audience has been so generous. Thank you to everyone, hundreds and hundreds of you, who have stepped forward with donations from $20 to $10,000. Somebody wants to set the upper level, you got to go above 10 grand. But I just want to thank you. Anyone who made a $200 donation, I know that cuts into your life. I know that takes something off. That's 3 nights out for dinner with the spouse or taking the kids on a day trip to an amusement park. I know that's a sacrifice, but you're creating a life and a summer for a kid. Listen to Raphael talk about his time with Angel Tree.
Now, almost 20 years later, it started with a gift. It started with an Angel Tree gift. It starts with an Angel Tree camp. Now I have changed the whole trajectory for my family. Not only do I work for Prison Fellowship, but I volunteer in prison. I am an Angel Tree donor. All of those things started with that initial investment. What's that worth? What's the soul worth? I would say a lot.
That's the best way to put it, and I love that. You can call 888-206-2764. 888-206-2764. Most of my audience goes online to hughhewitt.com. Please do it. If you've been meaning to do it and you've been waiting for summer to start and you just had a great weekend, it's a great time to do it. I want to play for you Asa Hutchinson on MSNBC with Jonathan Capehart. I applaud the former governor of Arkansas going to the opposite corner and actually talking across the blue-red divide with Jonathan. Cut number 13.
First of all, it's very early. The dust is not settled from people entering the race, so the voters are going to figure that out. Secondly, you look at my experience, there's not anyone that has the depth of experience that I have at both being a governor, balancing a budget, but also in Congress, balancing a budget, and then leading extraordinary important agencies, protecting our homeland, working on the crisis of drug overdose in America, national security issues. These are experiences that America needs when you look at border security, whenever you look at the challenge of crime in our cities and in our country. My background fits perfectly with that. I look forward to talking about my vision for America that includes more energy production, that includes more safety, enforcing the rule of law, strengthening our economy, and controlling federal spending. Well,
I'm going to, Governor Hutchinson has not yet been on. He's, of course, invited. Everybody's invited. We're working on next week. I'm going away tomorrow, Thursday, and Friday to my reunion. But we'll continue talking to the candidates. All of them always welcome every 2 weeks. Vivek Ramaswamy on Fox with Steve Hilton yesterday, cut number 15.
This is just the first step of if the Republicans take control of the White House and the Senate, what we're going to do is actually shut down the administrative state. That's really where the keys to the kingdom are. This was a small step along the way. So I'll give Kevin McCarthy credit for that, but I don't want to celebrate too much.
That's it. You know what? That's just fine. Because I'm celebrating a lot because I didn't think he would get this done. I thought that the markets. Remember when the Tories won and Liz Peek came in, and the city, London banking, rebelled and they forced her out. I thought markets might force the Republicans to the table, but Speaker McCarthy got it done, and my hat is off to him. He joins me after the break to celebrate, and I hope encourage others to clap and get going and realize that when the Republicans hang together, they win. ReliefFactor.com. When you take it every day, you win. I took it all weekend long, got 2 10Ks in on Friday and Monday. Take the day off in between. Not doing it today. May run around the streets of Cambridge this week when I'm down at the reunion. I go and see all my Democratic friends, and I'll bring my Relief Factor along. I will share it with my Democratic friends. And I don't know that there are any Republicans left. I went through the program order. There's not one Republican talking at all the various events. Got Democrats coming out of the woodwork, but they couldn't find one Republican. I'm going to be there, but they didn't ask me for the first time ever, and I'm fine with that. I like sitting in the audience. I just thought they could find, Jim Strzok or somebody, one Republican. But I'll give the ReliefFactor.com to everyone, because the older you get, the slower they move, unless they've been moving a lot. And I'm going to encourage everyone, and they've got fun runs and fun walks every day, and that's great. Get out there and move. The older you get, the more it is important to get out there and move. So ReliefFactor.com. I'm in the ReliefFactor.com studio up north. Look at how beautiful it is. It's beautiful because of ReliefFactor.com. Thank you, my friends at Relief Factor. Coming back with the speaker and talking about his big win for the Republicans in negotiations with President Biden. Stay tuned. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Welcome back, America. Speaker Kevin McCarthy joins me now. Mr. Speaker, welcome back to the Hugh Hewitt Show. Great to have you this morning.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it greatly.
Hey, congratulations. Mollie Hemingway and I were just talking about the fact nobody thought you'd get out of the box canyon. Joe Biden said no negotiations. Nobody thought you'd pull this off. I hope the conference agrees with that.
Well, the vast majority does, but there are some who wanted more. But, I mean, when you look at it and you compare it to others, think about when we had the presidency, the Senate, and the House. They raised the debt limit and spent more money. They didn't cut. We are spending less money than we spent the year before. We were able to plus up defense and the veterans, and that non-defense with not veterans is lower than it was in 2022. But we were able to do some amazing other things, though. Work requirements, meaning welfare reform, that's important to help people get a job. This is only for people with able-bodied, no dependents, and get them back into the workforce. But the rescissions about pulling money back, this is going to be the largest rescission in the history of Congress. And this is also the largest cut in Congress has ever voted on, more than $2.1 trillion. And then we get some red tape reform, cutting the red tape for NEPA, and studying environmental review projects. We time them so they can't go past 2 years. Right now it takes an average of 7 years to build a road just to study it. And then we've been able to do something that's very interesting that President Trump was able to do by executive order. It's called PAYGO, kind of tying the hands of the executive branch. If the president wants to add a new rule or regulation and it costs more than $100 million, they have to offset it. So we took that rule, made it a little stronger, and now we're putting it into law.
Mr. Speaker, I love to read headlines as a guide to whether or not the left or the right is most unhappy. From the Washington Post yesterday, quote, terrible public policy, close quote. The headline continues, why the debt deal infuriates climate activists. From the New York Times this morning, new details in debt limit deal, where the $136 billion in cuts will come from. Boy, are they angry on the left. And I'm a NEPA geek. The first time I met you, long ago and far away, even before you entered the California House, we were working together on environmental policy. The NEPA changes are a big deal. Very few people get this. That's a very big deal because we got to grow this economy.
This hasn't happened in 40 years. It streamlines. Look, there's more we can do, but think about what we were able to get here with only having one branch. Think about what more we could do in the future, but streamlining that is key. Get America working again so we can compete with the other countries.
Now, talk to us about the 12 appropriations bill. It's something I also talked about with Mollie. I think, again, small print, people's eyes glaze over. They just want to know who won, who lost. The Republicans won. Good on that. But what about the approps deals that now have to get through by January 1?
Well, the one thing I wanted to do was change Washington, open the House back up for people, make members come back to work. You're not going to pass a bill so you can find out what's in it later. 72 hours. This isn't 1,000 pages. This is less than 100 pages, 99 pages. 15 of it is just in rescissions of money we're pulling back, like that hardworking taxpayer $400 million they were supposed to send to China. But what this does, Congress has a responsibility to pass 12 appropriation bills every year. And so many times they don't, and then right before Christmas, some big omni where they pile it all together, no one gets to read, and they jam it through. If we don't do our work, there's a penalty. There's consequences. There's a 1% cut across the board to everything. So everybody has skin in the game. Do your job the way you were elected to do it, and let's get back to making this place work for the American public like it's supposed to.
Now, the overarching lesson, and I've said this from the beginning of the show, is that when the Republican caucus hangs together, they give the lead negotiators on anything leverage. You were in the room with the president. How deeply involved is the president? I don't want to bring up his infirmity right now. I just want to know what he's like to negotiate with in 2023. You've been dealing with him for a lot of years.
Yes. Look, this guy is not the same person he was before. He said he wasn't going to negotiate with us. He said he wouldn't do it, waited 97 days. They never gave us a chance, but when the Republicans got together, passed a debt ceiling bill, sent it to the Senate, one of my favorite clips is Schumer on Stephanopoulos saying, you just wait, we're going to win. The Republicans can't pass a bill, and this is going to be a clean debt ceiling. Well, you know what? It's not. It's now the largest savings of cuts in American history. $2.1 trillion so far. The Congressional Budget Office said it can even go higher. They don't even score what pay-go could mean. That would be $1.5 trillion. It doesn't even go into the fact of what we save on interest and others. But this is just the start. And you think for this. When we went into negotiations finally, I could only negotiate about less than 15% of the budget. 72% of this budget is all mandatory spending. So think about if we could actually work together and look, how can we put America back on the same page? I had the smallest sliver to look after, but we got the biggest savings we've had so far.
Well, I congratulate you. I think this will pass fairly easily, but I don't think you're going to get any of the squad voting for it. We'll lose a few Freedom Caucus people. I know that. That's their drill, and I understand it completely. Chip Roy's my friend. He's your friend as well.
He's my friend, too.
Yeah, but do you generally think the conference will walk away with an understanding that when they hang together, their leverage goes way up?
Yeah, that's what they got to understand. We have a small majority, but when we stick together, we're continuing to win. Think about what we've been able to do so far. And I didn't even bring up what we did with the IRS agents, because a lot of this is being misreported. So the president wanted to spend $1.4 billion this next year on hiring new IRS agents. We repealed that. And now we're going to be able to grab another $20 million of that going forward and reappropriate that. Maybe we get some Border Patrol agents down there. I think there's better use of that money, and we'll continue to fight to get the rest.
Well, the Democrats obviously made a big bet that you couldn't hold the conference together. They put all their chips on, the speaker only had a 3-vote margin when he became the speaker. He won't be able to hold it together. Do you think they will change their approach now?
I think so. And we're going to have to up our game, and sticking together proves that we can get this done.
All right, talk to me about, you just were on Fox and Friends and made some news, which I want to follow up on. The House will vote a contempt charge against FBI Director Wray unless he produces the documents. What is the situation there?
So Chairman Comer has put a subpoena for a document that he was told is out there. We have jurisdiction over the FBI. They did not follow through. I called Director Wray and said, this is very important. We have jurisdiction over you. I do a lot of things in Gang of Eight. If there is a concern about methods or areas of how we get it, redact names so we don't see that. But you got to show the document. And today is the deadline for him to act. If he does not act, he's not above the law, he's not above Congress, and we will hold him in contempt. And I want to be very clear about that.
And when you say that, do you think you have the conference will go along? Because that might excite some of your left wing of the Republican caucus, which is as important as the right wing of the Republican caucus. Will they all hang together again?
I believe they'll hang together because we, as a Congress, have the jurisdiction and the oversight of the FBI. We've watched what the FBI has been doing in the past, running amok. We requested one document. They could tell us whether they have the document or not. They haven't even answered that. But if they have the document, that committee has a right to see it in the oversight and their investigation.
The objection that is surfaced anonymously is that sources and methods will be compromised by that. I don't believe that. I just believe they're stalling. Did you talk to the director about it yet? Does he know what you said this morning?
I talked to him more than a week ago. I said, we are serious about this. If you're concerned about that, redact the name and send it to him. We do it all the time in the Gang of Eight and others. We can handle this.
All right.
But if he does not follow through, I will start to move contempt charges against him in Congress.
How long does that take to get from the beginning to the end of a contempt referral to justice, Mr. Speaker?
Well, we can do it in a short amount of time, in less than a week.
All right. Talk to me now about the timing for the debt deal. It's got to come out of rules. I think your first vote is today.
Come out of rules today, and then we would go vote on the floor tomorrow. What a new day that you get 72 hours to read the bill. I don't move. I'm actually saving money, less than 100 pages, and you got 72 hours to read it. The country can read it. There's not one thing in here that I think people would disagree about. There's no new tax increases, no new government programs. It is saving money, making us stronger, helps the supply chain by putting work requirements into welfare. We rescind money. If you take all the money we've ever rescinded in all the Congresses and you add them all up, this is more than that. We pull back the COVID money. The other things are just holding the consequences of not taking action. Repeal the money for the IRS agents this year. The red tape is something you know so well, streamlining for energy and infrastructure. There's even a pipeline in here, so we got natural gas moving again. That's going to make the global CO2 emissions even better because American natural gas is cleaner, 41% cleaner than Russian natural gas.
And if you've been doing this as long as I have, I always have my ear open for revenue enhancements, which is a Washington, D.C. speak for tax hike. There are none, right? I think this is the first time that the ghost of Dick Darman left the room. And I like Dick Darman, but he killed George H.W. Bush's second term by putting tax hikes in. There's nothing in here that raises revenue at all.
Yep.
Did they try?
Nothing. Not one dime. It only
did they try?
Oh, they tried the entire time. That's all they would request. New programs, tax increases, the president up to the last minute. That's all he requested.
So Chairman McHenry and Representative Graves did the negotiation here.
Yes.
Generally speaking, how do they sell it? Do you pull the conference together tomorrow?
We're going to do it. No, we're going to do it tonight. Look, there's nothing in here that we should be afraid of. There's nothing in here we have to hide. We're going to walk everybody through. Would everybody want more? Yeah. But you know what? This is the biggest cut we've ever got, and we protect military and our veterans, and we send the rest to lower levels than 22. This is just the start. We only got to look at less than 15% of the budget. But
if you had the Senate, how much more could you have done?
Oh, if we had the Senate, it would be such a different day. One, we would never have gotten that Omni to start out with. We wouldn't have the inflation because we wouldn't have the rise of all the $6 trillion the Democrats, but we could repeal so much more and put us on a stronger path.
Do you think there is a game plan for if and when the Republicans take back the Congress and the presidency that you've learned maybe the first outline of from this negotiation?
Sticking together makes us so much stronger, and having a plan. And remember, this is just one element of the plan, one step of the plan. The next one is you go through appropriations, and you're able to move, you're able to eliminate the wokeism, you're able to move forward with the smart investments and eliminate the waste. There's so much waste in Washington that you can eliminate and tie the president into that fight.
Speaker Kevin McCarthy, thank you. Congratulations. Good luck in getting the votes. I'm sure you will this week, and I appreciate your taking time with me on the first day back from a long weekend. He's been working the whole weekend, America.
Well, thank you. Thank you to all of that.
My pleasure. Always have the speaker on. Constitutional officers are always welcome on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Don't go anywhere, America. David Von Drehle comes in next. His book, The Book of Charlie, is magnificent. Stay tuned.
The Hugh Hewitt Show is now available on TV. Go to salemnewschannel.com or download the app. You can also watch on Roku and Fire Stick. Salem News Channel, the antidote to the mainstream media.
Welcome back, America. Serendipity is when a great writer moves in across the street from a great story, and that's what we have in the Book of Charlie, the brand new bestseller by David Von Drehle, my colleague from the Washington Post. David joins me from Kansas City this morning. How are you, David?
I'm great, Hugh. How are you?
I'm good. Congratulations. It's skyrocketing up the Amazon charts, and boy, did it hit a sweet spot. Now, authors love to be surprised by receptions like this, but what surprises you most about the kind of universal acclaim you've gotten from the Book of Charlie?
Well, it's amazing to be sitting on this quiet street in a suburb of Kansas City, writing about my across the street neighbor who lived to be 109, and to have that story strike a chord with people all across the country. It's a reminder to me of the resources that are all around us at any given time. The world is full of stories. It's full of heroes. It's full of people who inspire us just by making their way through the ups and downs of life. And I think it's a happy story, a hopeful story at a time when people are ready for that.
It's a story of resilience, too. And I think I was just talking with Bethany Mandel about this, about how one raises children. Charlie is a free-range child. I mean, getting across the country in a Model T and coming back riding the rails is not something that parents today would be inclined to permit. So, I mean, do you think it might reinvigorate the idea of free-range parenting?
You know, I've certainly rethought some of my own parenting decisions. As I've told Charlie's story, you know, I grew up as kind of a free range child myself. When I think of some of the knuckleheaded adventures that I got into, well, my mother was doing other things. And all that I learned from that, figuring out how to get myself out of some of the fixes that I got myself into. Now, obviously, we don't want kids, getting into so much trouble that they are injured, but the world is a friendlier place maybe than we think it is right now. There's so much information about every bad thing that happens anywhere in the world. We hear about it instantaneously, and it gives us the impression, many of us, that the world is just crawling with danger. And in fact, for most kids, in the United States anyway, it's a safe and survivable, thrivable world.
I hope that the readers of Nextdoor, which is my favorite app because it's always full of the world is ending reports from older neighbors, I just want them to keep a supply on hand of the Book of Charlie to send to the old people upset by the coyotes or whatever it is they're upset about. Charlie didn't let anything bother him. I mean, nothing bothered him. And your journalist wife checked out his story repeatedly, right down to the idea of brother John Lazia having a slot machine in Charlie's basement. Expand on the Kansas City of Pendergast, boss Pendergast, and brother John.
Charlie grew up in the wild boom time of wide open Kansas City. You know, during Prohibition and the Depression, Kansas City never shut down. It said that, and I think it's true, there was never a prosecution for a prohibition-related offense in Kansas City during all those years. It was run by political machine, the Pendergast family, boss Tom Pendergast. He had an alliance with the head of the Italian mafia at the time, brother John Lazia. Came in from New York and wrapped up Kansas City in a short period of time. This was, it was called the Paris of the Plains, and that wasn't a compliment. That was referring to the reputation Paris had as a place where the party never stopped and the sin was available round the clock. Before there was Las Vegas in the United States, there was Kansas City, and this is where all the kids and people from the Midwest especially could come and experience the big city and go back to the farm and tell their friends about it, or not.
It's many stories are within the Book of Charlie. Charlie White, Dr. Charlie White is the primary story. When I come back with David, we're going to talk about some of the subsidiary stories. But Dr. Charlie White does the thing that Arthur Brooks says is the hardest, which is to make a mid-career transition to a different specialty. We're going to talk about that after the break. But go out and get the Book of Charlie. Highest recommendation I can give you. Fetching Mrs. Hewitt already read it. I read it twice. And her book club has already adopted it for July. So, I mean, if you get the book club world keyed in on this, David, you're winning. Stand by. We'll be right back with David Von Drehle. This is the Book of Charlie. It's in bookstores everywhere. David doesn't quite yet know. You got to say the title 7 times. The Book of Charlie in every appearance. The Book of Charlie. And it's not a hard title to remember, and you will thank me for it. I will be back tomorrow. I'm going to my 45th reunion. We'll have a bunch of guest hosts coming in. Kurt Schlichter tomorrow, David, and then Dwayne on Thursday, and Ed Morrissey on Friday, but I'll be back next week. In the meantime, get the Book of Charlie and come back. You'll hear the rest on today's podcast and tomorrow or the next day later in the week. Stay tuned, America. Thanks for joining me. I'm Hugh Hewitt.